Then on Sports Central, we go over our 2022 college football predictions for the Ohio State Buckeyes, a team that definitely shows potential to be a major national contender in the 2022 season. Why that is we'll be over here today. We'll be analyzing this team and predicting their schedule game by game in this video, starting out with your team trends. Ohio State 11-2 last season. I mean, any season that you can get 11 wins is obviously an outstanding one, but for Ohio State, losing to Michigan and, of course, missing out on the Big Ten Championship and the college football playoff, there were a couple of disappointments there, but, once again, if you can get 11 wins in a season and even a Rose Bowl victory, for any team, for most any team, that would be an outstanding season. And, there's no doubt this team last season, they were a bit of a younger team. And heading into 2022, this team is returning a lot of those younger players, and that's going to build up to what's going to be a more experienced team in the 2022 season, which is obviously going to be huge. But they're 5-1 in their first 6 games, 6-1 in their last 7. And once again, it wasn't a bad season at all. This team, they beat Maryland 66-17, beat Penn State 33-24. They were ranked number 20 in the nation at the time. Of course, they beat Purdue. Purdue was on a hot streak at that time. They were number 19 in the nation. They were playing outstanding. They had knocked off 2 second-ranked opponents in a matter of just a few weeks. They had beaten number 2 Iowa and number 2 Michigan State. And heading into that Ohio State game, some people were calling for an upset there with Purdue beating Ohio State, and there's reason to see why. But the Buckeyes shut down Purdue in the end, 59-31. Beat Michigan State in what was an absolute blowout, 56-7. Of course, they lost to Michigan on the road, 27-42. That was quite a matchup, and that set up the Wolverines to win a Big Ten title and get to the college football playoff, which obviously was huge for them, considering Jim Harbaugh and some questioning him. But nonetheless, for Ohio State, they beat Utah in the Rose Bowl 48-45. There's no doubt that was an outstanding win. Utah was an excellent football team last season, and that was potentially, I'd say that was one of the best games of last season for sure. Probably a top 3 matchup there that we saw last season there in that game between Ohio State and Utah. So 11-2 is the final record. But moving into 2022 now, looking at your roster preview, this team does return their quarterback, C.J. Stroud. Last season, he was outstanding. He had a good season, to say the least. 4,400 yards, 44 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He had a 44-6 touchdown interception ratio, and this was only his first season as a full-time college starting quarterback. And his completion rate was 72%, which is outstanding as well. C.J. Stroud has potential to be the best quarterback in the nation going into next season. Bryce Young, of course, out of Alabama, is going to be up there too. But C.J. Stroud, he shows major potential, and I feel like this team are turning some of their key players. But of course, it is going to be tough. I will say, this team is returning several key players that will definitely build this team up to be outstanding next season. But the receiving core does take a couple of big hits. Jackson Smith-Njigba's coming back, which is obviously huge. Last season, he was the top receiver for this team. But Ohio State last season had the best receiving core in the country. There's no questioning that. Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. Of course, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave were both outstanding in 2020. They both came back, and you had Smith-Njigba, who performed up to a very high standard. So, it's going to be huge to have him back for this offense. But of course, losing Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, that will be tough. For C.J. Stroud, he was living the quarterback's dream last season, being able to throw to 3 outstanding receivers like that. So we'll see how that impacts him, losing Wilson and Olave, of course. But going into the next season, the running back situation looks really good. TreVeyon Henderson's coming back. Mayan Williams is coming back. Last season, if you look at Henderson, he put up 1,500 yards of offense, 19 touchdowns, and of course, Williams put up over 500 yards, 3 touchdowns. Master Teague is gone. He was the 3rd running back on this team last season, yardage-wise. But of course, if you look at the receiving situation, once again, it is a bit concerning. You also lose tight end Jeremy Ruckert. Last season, he put up 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. But if you look at the receivers here, if you look at the stats that those 3 receivers put up, Smith-Njigba, 1,600 yards and 9 touchdowns. He's going to be insane. He's going to be outstanding next season. I can just imagine. If you thought he was good last season, going into the next season, he's got some time to continue to improve. He's a force. But Garrett Wilson, over 1,000 yards last season, 13 touchdowns. That's obviously going to be tough to lose. And Chris Olave wasn't far behind him at about 930 yards and 13 touchdowns last season. They lose 2 offensive linemen, 3 defensive linemen, 2 in the secondary. So defensively, there's a couple of losses there. But for the most part, this team looks, I would say, really good going to next season. The backfield looks great. Obviously, the quarterback situation is excellent with C.J. Stroud. And, I mean, if he improves, which is expected, the running back situation is only going to get better. The receiving core is the one main concern on this team. But once again, you're doing just fine. You got Jackson Smith and Jigba coming back. So, but yeah, this team definitely looks good going to next season. Brings to the question, Big Ten champions once again in 2022. They're my favorite right now. I think Ohio State and Michigan are probably the top 2 going to next season. Michigan once again looks good, but Ohio State I feel like is my favorite right now. Potential national title favorite as well. I mean, they're in the conversation for that, and I feel like this team is going to be right up there. Definitely a team that could compete for a national title next season. Transfer portal and recruiting, of course, Jack Miller's headed off to Florida. Quinn Ewers was a quarterback for this team as well. He's off to Texas, so there's a couple quarterbacks there, but of course you're doing just fine. C.J. Stroud is outstanding to say the least. McAllister's coming in, defensive back from Oklahoma State, but you're losing a few players otherwise. You're losing linebacker Watts, safety Young, Sevyn Banks, Jacoby Cowan, and Marcus Hooker as well. Recruiting-wise, 4th in the nation, 1st in the Big Ten. No doubt they're in good hands. They're looking just fine there in recruiting, and that's, I mean, Ohio State, this team is always, I mean, past few years, they've been the main force in the Big Ten, and that doesn't look to change anytime soon. They got 2 5-stars coming in and 17 4-stars as well. That said, let's look at your schedule and going into next season. Definitely a very interesting matchup coming up here in Week 1 against Notre Dame, and of course it is huge. Ohio State does have that game in a home field advantage, so that's going to have an impact. And Notre Dame, of course, is losing a few key players. So they'll be a bit younger next season, but I mean, Ohio State, still, that's going to be a very interesting matchup. Arkansas State the next week, Toledo at home on the 17th. You got Wisconsin to finish out September. That'll be a fun one in the shoe as well. Rutgers at home on the 1st of October. Then you go to Michigan State. That should be an interesting matchup. You got Iowa at home, Penn State on the road, Northwestern on the road, Indiana at home, Maryland on the road, and then Michigan, you got them at home to finish out the season. So obviously Michigan is a tough place to play. So I mean, it was their year last year. I mean, just to say that, I mean, Michigan, it was their year in 2021, but in 2022, I think Ohio State's gonna bounce back. But looking at your September here, Notre Dame, I'm gonna favor Ohio State in that one. I feel like Ohio State going into the next season, C.J. Stroud, they're the more complete team. If you compare them with Notre Dame. Notre Dame should be good next season once again. I wouldn't be surprised if they'd be a ranked team for the majority of the season. I don't know if they'll be a national contender, but they should be good. But nonetheless, Ohio State, I'm going to favor them. Arkansas State, Toledo, both easy wins. Wisconsin at home, should be a fun one, having Wisconsin coming to town. But I'll favor Ohio State there in a close one. I think Wisconsin next season, I mean, they'll be okay. Honestly, the Big Ten West doesn't have a big standout to me. I think there's 4 or 5 teams that could get 8 or 9 wins, honestly, but I just don't know if any of those teams could get 10 or 11 plus. But Wisconsin, they should be decent, but I'll favor Ohio State there. Looking at October, Rutgers at home, easy win. Michigan State on the road, I'll favor Ohio State there. Michigan State, next season they're expected to be just as good or even better from most people right now, but I feel like Michigan State's going to decline just a bit. I don't think they'll be quite as good, but they'll still get 7 or 8 wins at least next season, but I'll favor Ohio State there. Iowa at home, easy win. I'm going to put that game as an easy win, meaning it's a win over 14 points. I see Ohio State winning that game by 17 or so. Penn State on the road. I'm going to actually favor Penn State in that game. That's obviously a tough one. I feel like Ohio State's going to lose 1 game in the regular season. There's a very good chance that this team goes 12-0 though in the regular season. But I will take Penn State. I think Ohio State, obviously going to a tough place and just a brutal place to play in Penn State. I think Penn State's going to be decent next season, 8 or 9 wins maybe, potentially 10. So they're going to be a good team. I don't know if they'll be quite as good as Ohio State, but I'll pick Penn State in that one barely. So heading into November though, you got 3 easy wins there with Northwestern, Indiana, and Maryland. And then Michigan to finish out the season at home. I'll favor Ohio State there. I think this is Ohio State's year to win the Big Ten title back and make it to the college football playoff. Potentially this team wins the national title once again as well. We'll have to see what happens. But I've got 11-1 for Ohio State going into next season. So, once again, that'll be a fun matchup, definitely to say the least, on November 26th against Michigan. Both teams, that's probably going to be your Big Ten East championship. once again this upcoming season. So obviously a huge matchup to finish out the regular season, but 11-1 is the record for this team next season. But once again, I could totally see this team going 12-0. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below on Ohio State, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.